All right, hello again. So, on this podcast episode, I want to kind of decompress some thoughts about Amtrak and Colorado. Because when you think of Amtrak, typically an Amtrak capital of the world, we think of the Northeast Corridor and Chicago. There's not much going on Amtrak style in Colorado. Now, Colorado does have the Zephyr and the Chief that squeeze through it. And Colorado has a long history of very rich passenger rail. So much so that a lot of passenger rail lines here have been preserved, such as the Roe Gorge route and Durango and Silverton. But again, it's kind of the gimmification of rail, of like it's this weird like tourist attraction. It's not actually, rail's never actually going to be an integral part of our society, right? No. But the irony about Colorado is that in a state that there's there's mountainous states in this country. Alaska, Montana, Idaho. Pretty much the only state that's like on our level would be like California, Oregon, and Washington with regards to large population centers and lots of mountain roads. So in a state that has the population that is as recreationally active as it is and has a large amount of mountain highways and mountain roads that we all know are dangerous, even in summer, especially in winter, that why isn't rail travel more common in the mountains? Because, it does seem like if highways inherently are dangerous, even if you're in Kansas, then putting them on the side of a mountain and adding snow just seems like a recipe for disaster. And it's just kind of an accepted risk that we've acclimated to. That like, oh yeah, a couple hundred people die each year on Colorado roads. Sometimes it's, we make fun of people who aren't confident on driving on snow. People who aren't confident driving on mountain roads with no guardrails. The other day I went up Independence Pass, which is by no means a difficult pass. I think Red Mountain Pass takes the trophy for like the most insane pass in the state when it comes to a highway. And then we got plenty of off-road passes, such as I know Engineer Pass is pretty gnarly, and I've been up Hancock Pass, and Engineer Pass definitely has more of that I'm gonna fall off the edge of a cliff vibe. But Hancock Pass is more like I'm dropping, 4-foot stair steps on my dirt bike. So, different flavors. But in a state that has as much tourism and traffic in the mountains as we do, looking at you, I-70, why is rail transport not more popular? So this is where I want to kind of talk about, Amtrak's future role in the state and how, we're probably never going to be on the level of like the Northeast Corridor, but there still are some corridors worth discussing in Colorado. Of course, I am first and foremost, a champion of the Tennessee Pass. The big things that the Tennessee Pass has going for it are connecting the Chief and Zephyr, the Southwest Chief and California Zephyr, from Dotsero down to Pueblo, and then doing that last little extension to La Junta, which I think that'd be really nice, because then you open up some pretty incredible city pairs for Amtrak. You could do Albuquerque to Salt Lake City. You could do Denver to, this one might be kind of around the elbow, but you could do Denver to Kansas City, looping back. You kind of have to go left to go right kind of situation, or you got to go west to go east. But Albuquerque to Salt Lake City, I think that's a pretty good city pair. And of course, Salt Lake City to Kansas City, that makes more sense because you're kind of going in the same direction. But yeah, there are some interesting options that open up with the Tennessee Pass, and that could be the beginning of a north-south central access that could connect the 4 rail lines, the 4 Amtrak lines that crisscross the country. And the funny thing is that of the 4 long-haul Amtrak routes, 2 of them go through New Mexico, 2 of them go through Colorado. Of course, the chief being the one that goes through New Mexico and Colorado. And then the remaining one's up in Montana. So the hub and spoke idea of everyone's got to transfer in Chicago, that's kind of a tough sell for me. But the fact is that the Tennessee Pass exists. It's here right now. And it could connect 2 out of the 4 east-west long-haul Amtrak trains, which would be pretty cool. And eventually it'd be nice to have the, I do forget, is it the Sunset Limited? I forget. What is that? Someone will mention this at some point to me. But the Amtrak route that basically runs through the Gadsden Purchase, the southern Amtrak route in New Mexico. Is it the Sunset Limited? Yeah. But eventually tying that, I think it goes through Las Cruces. Yeah, connect Albuquerque, needs to tie that all together. Maybe it's an extension of the Rail Runner. And I'll use this as a moment to talk about the Front Range Corridor. The Front Range Corridor I think it really makes a lot of sense, especially if it's woven into a north-south bridge to connect all these rail lines together. I do understand why it might terminate at Cheyenne, and only ever terminate at Cheyenne because, Montana's a ways north of that, so we may never actually get up to the Empire Builder. I believe that's the Empire Builder up there. But definitely having a Front Range Corridor that would run from Albuquerque to Cheyenne, I think is a no-brainer. Last I checked, there was 81% support for the Front Range Corridor in Colorado, and 61% of people would be supportive of a sales tax to support it as well. So I do think the Front Range Corridor is probably going to happen. In my crystal ball, I kind of feel like the Front Range Corridor could be complete and operational before California high-speed rail is finished. Well, I at least think that we could probably get Denver to Colorado Springs up and running before the entirety of California high-speed rail is running. We might not beat parts of California high-speed rail, but Denver to Colorado Springs, that's a no-brainer. That's kind of your money shot right there if you really want to drive popularity for the route. And again, I've driven on I-25. I've seen semis blown off the road on I-25. Ironically, I-25 gets a lot of nasty wind and blizzard conditions in winter and can go easily into a whiteout. We normally think of, a lot of this nasty stuff happening on mountain roads, and it does. But I-25 is not immune to Colorado's weather. Especially with wind. I remember one time I saw 14 semi-trucks blown over on I-25 due to a high wind case. Yeah, if you're hauling drill pipe, you're probably not going to get blown over. But yeah, if you're hauling a semi full of teddy bears, you're going to get blown over on I-25. And I remember driving past them what's going, the first one's oh my gosh. The second one's holy cow. Third one, you're this is the problem. By the time I saw the 10th one, I'm yep, this is a thing. Semi-trucks getting just toppled by the wind. And you'd see a bunch of semi-trucks huddled underneath an overpass, waiting out the wind. And yes, high wind can blow over light double stacks. That is possible. But it's much more rare than semis getting blown over. But Amtrak's future in Colorado. High-speed rail, maybe only on the Front Range Corridor. and that might be higher speed rail. They say to be competitive, it would have to maintain an average track speed of 75 miles an hour, which is pretty easy to do. And I think that even if you got into like, you know, upper end Brightline territory where you're like 125, it'd be the kind of thing like if you could at least, you know, guarantee like 90 to 100 mile an hour speed average on the Front Range corridor, it will be viable. People will ride it. And then with that increased ridership, there'll be increased investment. And then slowly the speed of the line will creep up, pending that they have like the correct train technology, you know, signals, long switches. That's very important. You want to have long turnout switches, tilting trains, and of course, probably what they're doing right now is, you know, figuring the alignment. You know, if you want high-speed rail, you kind of that's the only thing you really have to have from the beginning, because you can, you know, definitely have a good alignment and, you know, run trains on them that and have signals and switches that aren't rated for high-speed rail, and then gradually upgrade that stuff. But the one thing you can't really, you know, retroactively upgrade is the alignment. You know, you need gentle curves and have large radius curves to maintain high track speed. So as long as they get that, which other than like, you know, the suburban sprawl around Colorado Springs and Denver, it should be fairly straightforward, because on the Front Range, I mean, if anyone's driven along I-25, you know, there's not much there, you know, in between cities. So hopefully if they can get a good alignment between cities, then they'll be able to make up for the slow running inside cities as they wiggle their way out, because that's always a trade-off. Like, do you want to have a higher speed alignment but build the station further out of town and have additional transit services transport you to downtown core? Or do you want to weave your high-speed train right through the core of the town, which is ideal, but with all the development that has happened, that is difficult. So you'd have to look very closely on a map and take into account like the political situation, the NIMBYs, how are we going to weave this rail line through all these Front Range cities and create a viable alternative to driving. Because, you know, the thing about the corridors, like the Northeast Corridor and Brightline, is that typically like the American style of high-speed corridors is everything has to be in a straight line. I know Brightline with Tampa kind of has an L, but like it's still a line. There's not many branches. But the Front Range corridor, you know, due to the mountains being right there as a geographic barrier to sprawl, kind of concentrating all the cities along it. And I know Denver, Colorado Springs, and Boulder have pretty atrocious sprawl. And I know we like to make fun of Denver a lot, but hey, I have to give props to Denver that they have built out a very large, comprehensive, electrified rail network. And their train between Union Station and the airport, I mean, A+. What I would like to see is Denver's Union Station get more than just, you know, local transit and a California Zephyr once a day through there. I would like to see a future in which, you know, Union Station lives up to its expectations, and Union Station has, you know, has the Zephyr. It'll have the Front Range corridor, which might be higher speed rail running through it. And then it has the ski train, which will hopefully run year round. I really think the ski train should run year round. And the Amtrak routes I'd like to see in Colorado is like there are rails that go from Denver all the way to Steamboat Springs. They should be utilized. There should be trains that go between Denver and Grand Junction and stop at all the major towns kind of along the Central Corridor, which is kind of like the I-70 corridor for Union Pacific. The Central Corridor that goes from Denver to Grand Junction, sometimes called the Moffett Subdivision for part of it, because of the Moffett Tunnel. But I'd like to see more trains going east-west along the Central Corridor. I'd like to see Amtrak trains going up into Steamboat Springs, you know, have like the ski train Mark II that, you know, the first ski train goes to Winter Park, the second ski train goes up to Steamboat Springs, and then there's my third ski train I'd like to see go all the way to Vail, which would sneak up through Docero, then go to Vail. And that would mostly be like a weekender express for people who want to go ski Vail but don't want to drive all the way out there from Denver. Because I know there's the Eagle County Airport, which, you know, people who really want to fly into Vail, that's where they'd fly into. That just seems very expensive to fly into Vail. And whether it's a local operator or some branch of Amtrak, you know, there should be a rail line running along the Tennessee Pass from the, you know, basically western Eagle County to eastern Eagle County, preferably getting some kind of express bus lane or rail extension up into Vail from where I-70 and the Tennessee Pass go their separate ways. And then, of course, you know, having the Tennessee Pass brought back and possibly under Amtrak's authority, where it's their railroad, they're the only ones who run on it, them and maybe some commuter trains, but largely it's a passenger railway, not a freight railway. That would ease the concerns of a lot of NIMBYs in Eagle County. I mean, I still feel like they, you know, absolutely detest the idea of Amtrak and passenger rail in Eagle County, but they really, really don't want to see that oil train run. And if Amtrak were to somehow step up and say, hey, we will buy the Tennessee Pass off of Union Pacific because we are a passenger service, they are a freight service. Union Pacific seems to not want to let go of the Tennessee Pass to another freight operator. I know BNSF would love to acquire the Tennessee Pass so they could compete with Union Pacific for traffic through Colorado, but inevitably, Union Pacific does not like the idea of introducing a competitor, especially running on their railroad or their what used to be theirs. So Union Pacific's content to just kind of sit on the Tennessee Pass for now, which I'm okay with to an extent because that means it's not getting ripped up anytime soon as long as it's like at Union Pacific, you know, most railroads never want to let go of real estate. I just hope that if Union Pacific ever gives it away or sells it, it's to Amtrak or someone who will operate it. Even the state of Colorado, in their 2018 freight and passenger rail plan, brings up the Tennessee Pass multiple times as a potential corridor, and if given the option, they would like to acquire it and kind of do their own version of the rail runner. So with this future that I see, a lot more trains in Colorado, but it's like it'd be Colorado-style railroading. It wouldn't be, you know, Chicago-style Metra, or, you know, they're doing some work over there with an excavator. It wouldn't be East Coast-style running. It would be very much so like we are running ski trains, we are running recreational trains, we are trying to get cars off of our roads, increase the safety on the roads, and decrease traffic and, honestly, fatalities on Colorado mountain roads, which happen every single year. Every single pass, every single east-west pass, you know, it claims a few lives every year. And providing an option for people to not have to take their life in their hands and the lives of others and drive over Eisenhower or Wolf Creek Pass or Monarch Pass, or Independence Pass is closed during the winter, but still, passes are gnarly. And removing traffic from them would make them a bit safer. But yeah, so more ski trains, some kind of Grand Junction, Denver connector, sections of commuter rail on the Tennessee Pass for Vail. And this is something I'm going to be bringing up in a video I hope to release before the fall. I'm going to do a much more deeper dive, refined look at Amtrak and the future it has in Colorado. But I love the idea of a Front Range corridor. I do think it's going to happen, especially as gas prices continue to rise and climate change becomes much more of a pressing concern. And especially as people on the Front Range start to see less and less snow on their mountains and more heat on their thermometers. Those will drive people to like, yeah, we need to build this thing. But it said that like the Front Range corridors, like the first trains are probably over a decade away. I'd like to see us cut that time in half and get something running between like Colorado Springs and Denver. But it's going to be a while. And there's going to be a big fight of NIMBYs. There's going to be a lot of people thinking that the rail line is a boondoggle, a waste of taxpayer money. And speaking of waste of taxpayer money, they've already conducted the study on I-70. And they said, essentially, the traffic on I-70, the bad traffic during ski season, is a 300 to 500% increase in traffic for a very, I would say it's a short period of time, but obviously if you've ever been on I-70, that does not feel like a short period of time. But when the ski traffic hits in the mornings and evenings on I-70, there is a 300 to 500% increase in traffic. And that means that because I-70 is constricted inside of a canyon and it's a mountain highway, they're like saying we could probably add one more lane to this highway, which I know I-70 ranges from I think it's mostly 2 lanes each direction. So it could go from a 4-lane highway to a 6-lane highway, which if you look at the math, that means that you're increasing, if you add that 3rd lane, you're increasing capacity by 33% or 33.3%. Depending on how you want to look at it. You can either say you're increasing it by 33% or you're increasing it by 50%, depending on how you want to look at it. Because that lane will take a third of the traffic, or it'll be, 50%, adding a 3rd lane to 2 lanes, you're adding 50% more capacity. So it depends on how you want to do your math. But regardless if it's 50% increase in capacity, that does not come anywhere near to the 300 to 500% increase in demand. And, they're throwing figures around and it would be, $10 million plus per mile to add this additional lane. And thankfully, it seems like level heads are prevailing, and they see that, expanding I-70 with the environmental costs of widening the road and, taking up more real estate down in the canyon to build a bigger highway, that wouldn't even, what they've realized is that it's expensive and it wouldn't even solve the problem. You could not build enough lanes on I-70 to eliminate the traffic problem. And that's good. We should be realizing stuff like that. We should be figuring this stuff out now. But back to the Front Range corridor. Yeah, people are going to say it's a boondoggle, but people are also realizing that throwing more and more money at highway expansions is also a boondoggle. And the rail system could actually reduce traffic while widening lanes would not. But still, the the Front Range corridor that parallels I-25, it's still in the planning phases. They have a tax district now, but it's that whole we need to plan our next planning session, discuss our next planning session to see how we're going to plan our next plan for our big plan. So that way we can make a plan to plan meetings for plans. That's kind of a lot of rail projects in a nutshell, which I hope in the next 10 years people get fed up with that and be like, listen, just build the damn thing. We need it now. We don't need it 10 years from now. Well, we do need it 10 years from now, but we really need it now, and we're really, really going to need it 10 years from now. So get your act together. Let's get this going. Which brings me all the way back to the Tennessee Pass. The Tennessee Pass is here right now. It has its own right-of-way. It's less about the track and the rails and the infrastructure in the ground. It's more the fact that that right-of-way is intact and it is still under private ownership. So if the federal government or the state government or Amtrak itself or a trust were to buy or acquire a lease of the Tennessee Pass from Union Pacific, right-of-way is taken care of. We have it immediately. And then we can get into the process of revitalizing the rail line, which it is 164 miles of rail from Dulcero to Parkdale. An agreement would have to be reached with the Royal Gorge route. An agreement would have to be reached with BNSF out of Canyon City, and possibly Rock and Rail. I know Rock and Rail has rights all the way down to Pueblo. And they would need to get, through the Royal Gorge down into Pueblo. And then they would have to get the remaining handful of miles from Pueblo to La Junta. So A majority of the track would be under Amtrak's direct ownership, which if they had rights to the Tennessee Pass and they're the only operator on there, they don't have to worry about getting around freight trains and such. Then it's estimated it would cost $250 million to bring the rail line up to standard. That seems pretty reasonable. And if you break that out, that's like $250 million for 164 miles of track. That's actually a pretty good deal when it comes to, millions of dollars per mile of track. It's better. It's a much better deal than the amount of money you would have to spend to widen I-70 or widen I-25. And then Amtrak could, then they would start running along the Tennessee Pass. They would bring jobs because, Amtrak is a railroad. They do need to have maintenance of way. They do need to have maintenance and dispatch, crew. They could open up a lot of job opportunities in the valley along their route, and they would connect the Zephyr and the Chief, which would, like I said earlier, open up some interesting city pairs. My most favorite city pair is Albuquerque to Salt Lake City. And also, not to mention, Albuquerque to Denver. That would be available too. So that, I think, would be a good idea for Amtrak to get that line, because that could be their beginning of their north-south connections. And the thing is that one day, someday, maybe, hopefully, the Front Range corridor gets built, at which point Albuquerque to Denver would make more sense going along that. But Albuquerque to Salt Lake City would make more sense going along the Tennessee Pass, because to go all the way up along the Front Range, then make a left turn at Denver to go west, then go up and over the Moffett Tunnel and drop down. Like, it's just a matter of, like, if Amtrak owns the Tennessee Pass, it is the hypotenuse of the triangle. It is shorter than the combined distance of the legs, and if it's theirs, they don't have to worry about competing with freight traffic on Union Pacific Central Corridor, which would be the northern leg of that triangle. They'd be able to do whatever they want, and they'd be able to upgrade the track as much as they want, because there are sections of the Tennessee Pass, which is notoriously a tight and twisty railroad, but there are sections like between Browns Canyon and BV, and between Salida and Browns Canyon, and north of BV up into Leadville, except for, like, when it goes past Pine Creek. There are sections that are fairly straight and very few curves, and those are places where, if the track was correct, you could gain some time. You could open up that throttle. Oops. Let me fix that real quick. My oar hit it. All right, there we go. Let's get that like that. All right, now we're back in business. But yeah, there are some pretty nice alignments on the Tennessee Pass. It's a bit more tricky on the descent into Eagle County, but what it lacks in, speed, it makes up in that being absolutely gorgeous. And if Amtrak brought this back, probably a third of the people riding the train would just be riding it as a scenic railroad. It would be absolutely drop dead gorgeous. And that's a feather I think Amtrak would like to put in its hat. Like, hey, we operate the Tennessee Pass. It is an absolutely gorgeous rail line. And I know people in Salida and BV and Vail will be like, there's not enough people here to justify a train. Blah, 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 blah. We aren't going to ride it. Blah, blah, blah. Cars, blah, blah, blah. We have the Mustang, we don't need it. And I say, like, hey, like, you need to think about the big picture of, like, this is for riders on the Zephyr and the Chief. Having the Tennessee Pass there would increase ridership on the Zephyr and the Chief, because then, like I said, Albuquerque to Salt Lake City. Or, people could ride on the Zephyr and then ride the, whatever you want to call the Tennessee Pass route, which, honestly, that's a perfectly fine name. I know that's kind of a bit bland for Amtrak, which has things like the Empire Builder and Ethan Allen Express and the Downeaster and the Sunset Limited. That's something that says the Tennessee Pass route. Not the most creative name. One of these days, I'll probably do some collaboration with a lot of people to see, like, if Amtrak acquired the Tennessee Pass, what would they call that service? Like the Valley Flyer, the Collegiate, because it passes by all the collegiate peaks, Ski Train number 2. I don't know. But for now, just call it the Tennessee Pass route. That'd be a feather in their cap that they could put in, like another gorgeous railroad that they operate. And that would drive ridership. You know, people would come just to ride it. And, like, you know, there would be options for people to ride from Denver down into Salida if they wanted to. California to Salida would be an option. Chicago to Salida. It's like in computer science, there's kind of like this thing of like the more interconnected nodes, like this is like the argument with the internet, the more interconnected the nodes, the more traffic on the network, because now you're basically solving more problems and providing more solutions for people to use the network. So, you know, connecting those two rail lines could be huge. But you need to, you know, be a little bit creative and a little bit open-minded and see like what could happen, what could be. What would happen if Amtrak were able to connect 2 out of its 4 long-haul, long-distance routes and have a train running between La Junta and Dostero, or Dotsero. I truly don't know how to pronounce that town's name. I heard it like a guy tell me what it was pronounced the other day. Dotsero? I don't know. It's where the Tennessee Pass links up with Union Pacific Central Corridor in Eagle County. I mean, you can just say like it links up in Eagle County. But yeah, if Amtrak could somehow reach a deal with Union Pacific to reactivate the line and run it themselves, Union Pacific would be like, well, fine, you're a passenger railroad. I don't see you as a competitor. So yeah, sure, you can run it. And it might just be a lease where Union Pacific still says, well, it's still mine, but you know, you run trains on it, not me. Or the state has it. And once, you know, I do, in my fantasy land, I do see a world in which maybe one day, someday, the rail runner or a version of it with the Front Range Corridor gets extended all the way up to Denver and Cheyenne. Basically, tie the Front Range Corridor in with the rail runner, increase speeds on the rail runner and the Front Range Corridor, so that way, like, you know, maybe it's a partnership between New Mexico and Colorado, and they could run a pretty awesome service connecting Albuquerque all the way up to Cheyenne. And of course, at Pueblo, there would be a turnoff for and if you want to go into the valley, if you want to go up to the Arkansas or over to Vail, there's the Tennessee Pass route. There's an Amtrak train rolling in the station right now. And maybe Colorado could also, you know, run their own rail service on the Tennessee Pass with Amtrak. You know, Amtrak maybe handles more of we're connecting our Zephyr in Chief, our timetable is synchronized to them. And then we have a couple ski trains here and there. But then Colorado also runs like a lighter weight service along the pass. And I like loops. You know, the idea of the Front Range Corridor being complete. Now you have the Colorado Triangle. And this rail circle, this circuit, would completely encompass and have ready access to all the population centers in the state and a pretty large swath of the recreational areas in the state. And people are complaining you know, trains bring in the riffraff. It'd make it too crowded. And I say okay, Salida, okay, BB, have you been downtown on a weekend? Have you seen how many cars show up? If you're saying a train's gonna make it worse, it's the reality is that, you know, people kind of get a sense of crowdedness in a small town, not by there being lots of people in restaurants or walking in shops. They get a sense of crowdedness in small mountain towns when there's just cars everywhere and the locals can't find a place to park. That's when the locals get frustrated. It's not about the crowds of people coming from Denver or Colorado Springs or Kansas or Timbuktu. It's the fact that they brought 2 tons of steel and plastic with them, or 4 tons of steel, plastic, and lithium. So it's less about, you know, the dollars at the cash register and, you know, full tables at restaurants and people checking out galleries and shops. People tend to enjoy that, you know. That's money to the town. That's commerce. That's economy. It's more the fact of every single parking space in town is full. Definitely saw this in FibArc 2023, where Salida was just overrun with vehicles. So, you know, the people who make the argument, don't bring the train to town, it'll ruin the environment, it'll ruin the atmosphere, it'll ruin the economy, it's a waste of taxpayer money, we're overcrowded. Just remember, like, your overcrowding is a perception of vehicles, not necessarily of people. Yeah, you need to have a little bit of creative thinking and an open mind to see that, you know, a train running through town is not the end of the world. It's how we prevent the world from ending with climate change and car dependency. You know, imagine the people in the Front Range that might be able to, especially if you live in Denver, could say, you know, Denver has a pretty good transit system and I really enjoy it, but I still have to keep my Tacoma and my Subaru because if I want to go up into the mountains, you know, I need my car. So, you know, I could probably get rid of this thing, but, you know, I have to own it and maintain it and pay taxes on it and fuel it and register it. Because if I want to go into the mountains to go ski or hike, I have to have this thing. Versus like once we build the Colorado Triangle, a lot of people who live in the Front Range, especially in Denver where they have a pretty good transit system, might be able to get rid of their car altogether. And that's a win for the climate. Because now they're saying, hey, I can get on the Denver Rapid Transit, the DART, you know, DRT, and I can, you know, get on a light rail or a bus and get to Union Station, and I can hop on a train. I know right now you can hop on a Mustang, but you know, the Mustang's great, but they're doing one bus a day right now. By this fall, it might be 2 buses a day. And, you know, at most, that's, what, 200 people a day via bus? It's like, I think you need 10 buses or really 20 buses before you could start to compete with, you know, a good rail network running on the Tennessee Pass. And we can have both. There's no reason we can't have both. I like timetable splitting where, you know, the bus comes every hour and the train comes every half hour. Okay, that's really wishful thinking, but still. But yeah, you get to Union Station and then, like, depending on what's leaving next, if the bus is leaving next, and the bus would probably be a faster but less comfortable ride because, let's face it, riding a bus on a twisted mountain pass through Denver traffic on Colorado mountain roads, not ideal. I mean, yeah, like the bus will always be here and the bus will be like the fast option because they can take a more direct route, which, you know, especially with 285. That used to be a rail line, but we ripped it up and replaced it with a highway. Yay us. But yeah, still, you know, you can take a bus if you want to get out into the mountains really quick and go places where the rail line can't take you. Alternatively, you could hop on a train, head up out of Denver, go through the Moffett Tunnel, you know, go through Winter Park, drop down into Del Cerro, start heading up the Tennessee Pass, past Vail, go through Leadville, then drop into BV and get off, and bam, you are in kayaking and mountain bike heaven. And the thing about trains versus buses is that on a train, it's a lot easier for everyone to store their bike and kayak and backpack than it is on a bus. Like, I just saw the Mustang this morning and they do have bike racks, but it looks like they could only put like maybe 4 bikes on the Mustang. So if people are wanting to come, you know, do some mountain biking out in BV and Salida, well, having a train leave from Denver where they got an entire baggage car for bicycles, go for it. It could be done. I wouldn't mind. So the future of recreational Amtrak rail in Colorado. Ski trains, bike trains, kayak trains. It could happen. All we need to do is make sure that those NIMBYs in Vail don't ever get the authority to rip up their section of the railroad. I mean, if worst case scenario, say Eagle County goes nuclear and they just start ripping up all the rail in their county, which I think goes all the way up to the top of Tennessee Pass, actually. and there's just a tunnel at the top of the Tennessee Pass with half a rail line coming out one side of it. And hopefully Lake County doesn't rip up their rail line. But even then, like, say all we ever get is Canyon City to Pueblo, and it's not a through running line anymore. I think we would think we're idiots for letting that happen, but the line could still be of service. You know, it wouldn't be as much service because you don't get the chance to connect the Zephyr and the Chief anymore, which is a real pity, but the line could still provide value. Of course, that would only really work if the Front Range corridor was built. I'm getting depressed just thinking about this. Please, Eagle County, do not rip up your railroad. You need to understand that we can't all buy Teslas. There's not enough cobalt and lithium in the world to completely electrify every single bus and car in the country. Hydrogen fuel cells, maybe, but even then, don't project your elitist, wealthy, I don't believe in public transit because I'm a rich NIMBY principles on everyone else. You will not be treated nicely in the history books if you were to do that. So Union Pacific, hold on, don't let them take your railroad away from you. And in the courtroom, I hope that level heads prevail and they see the value of the pass. In Colorado, which has kind of stayed out of this to an extent, except for like a couple of politicians and senators here and there, they seem to understand the value of the railroad. Please, for the love of all that's good and holy, do not rip up the Tennessee Pass. It's too valuable. It solves problems. It solves much bigger problems than buying a Tesla ever could. I saw a quote where they said, why are we living in the past? Can't we just, let the past go and rip up the railroad? It's like, oh, you moron. We already did that, and look where it got us. It got us to car dependence, and it got us to all hooked on oil and the most inefficient mode of transit. Both inefficient use of energy, space, and time. Like, really, cars only are good for off-roading and, going, really, cars aren't really good at anything, honestly. I mean, they're fun, but, as a species, we've reached a point where we can't indulge in this luxury anymore of personal vehicle ownership. So, I do switch back and forth, like, oh, it's never going to happen, oh, it's inevitable. But this railroad right here, it can help solve climate change. It can do its part. And if Amtrak were to run the Tennessee Pass, that would be absolutely fantastic. And maybe Vail would be like, we don't even want a station here. And Amtrak would be like, fine, we'll keep going past you guys. We're carrying people off the Chief and the Zephyr and running through Eagle County, Lake County, Chaffee County, Fremont County, and I think Pueblo's in Fremont County, is it? No, it's not. And whatever that last county is where La Junta is. I think it makes sense. I think it's a much better spending of public funds than widening freeways. And as the last little tidbit that I'm going to tack on here about Amtrak and the future of Colorado passenger rail is I want to briefly mention about the I-70 Guideway project. So the I-70 Guideway project, I think it's been around since the early 90s. They already knew it was going to be a problem back then. And basically, they brought up the idea of there's no way how you can widen I-70 enough to deal with its congestion and its peak demand. And due to the gradient and tight and twisty nature of I-70, traditional rail would not be viable. So they proposed a monorail. And I think they said something like a monorail that would go like 150 miles an hour. I don't even know of any monorail out there that can do that other than like a maglev, if you want to consider a maglev a monorail. Now, typically monorails are written off as gadget bond, which means that they're a really fancy, shiny solution that doesn't really solve problems. But, if we give this proposal a benefit of the doubt, let's look at the strengths of a monorail. Well, if you're going along I-70, there probably are going to be a lot of sections where you need to be elevated. And it is cheaper to build a monorail elevated typically than it is to build a light rail or conventional rail line. Monorails can bank pretty well and take tight curves and fast curves. They can climb steeper grades because I think a lot of monorails are actually rubber-tired vehicles running on essentially a concrete rail. So you've got much better grip. Terrible rolling resistance, but that usually means you can climb pretty steep stuff. It would be elevated and out of the elements and snow, which means like how much snow could build up on a monorail rail before it gets blown off. I mean, I think I mentioned in the podcast earlier, like, are there monorail snowplows out there? But so far, like, the strengths of a monorail complement the difficulties of building along I-70. It'll be steep, it'll be twisty, it'll probably need to be elevated, it'll need to deal with a lot of elements. I just don't think a monorail can really get the speed necessary. I mean, we'll see what future monorail technology looks like and how fast monorails can feasibly go, which is an interesting concept to think about. But yeah, definitely there's definitely merit to the monorail proposal. The issues with monorails are like it doesn't integrate well with existing rail infrastructure. But on the I-70 corridor, there is no existing rail infrastructure. And the question is like, okay, how much of the line would need to be elevated versus like if it's something like only 40% of the line would have to be elevated, then I would say I would rather see a traditional railroad that's like a cog railroad, like a rack railroad. Because cog railroads, they have a third, it's not really a rail, but it's like a third track running right through the center that has, basically it's an unrolled gear. And there's a traditional gear or a cog on the bottom of the locomotive that interfaces with this gear, and that's how it climbs. Switzerland has these all over the place because obviously Switzerland has a lot of mountains. Colorado, we actually have the Pikes Peak Railroad, which is a cog railroad. So, we know how cog railroads work in Colorado. Actually, allegedly, the Pikes Peak Railroad is the most popular kind of recreational tourism railroad in the entire state, allegedly. Kind of impressive, considering like it's competing with the Durango and Silverton, which is already kind of a darling doll in the eye of many rail fans. Cog railroads. Yeah, I'd rather see a cog railroad. Now, a cog railroad would struggle to go, very, very fast while it's on the cog. Now, usually if you're climbing a 7% grade, no one really cares if you can do it at 200 miles an hour. They mostly care whether or not you can do it at all. So it'll be interesting to see a solution where it's a standard gauge railway or narrow gauge. But yeah, a standard gauge railway or just basically a traditional railway that I'm going this way. Sometimes these pillow waves or these pillow eddies can do weird stuff in pinball. But getting a rack railway of some sort, whether it's narrow gauge or standard gauge, but it's more of a traditional style of train than a monorail, because like say only 40% of the line has to be elevated. In that case, it'd be much cheaper. It makes more sense. Terrible pinball line today. I'm just being lazy. But it makes much more sense to build a monorail in the air than it does a monorail on the ground. And it's much cheaper to build stuff on the ground. So I think it'd make more sense to build a partially elevated traditional railway that has, that is a cog railway, not the entire time, because you can have cog railways where, only part of the line is a cog railway, and you run, traditionally most of the time, and then, you do need to slow down and interface with the cog. But hey, we can put people on the moon and maybe Mars. I think we can figure out a faster way to engage cogs a clever solution. But yeah, having a traditional railway that would be cheaper to build on the ground, and then when it needs to, you add the rack to climb steeper grades, and then you elevate sections you need to elevate to get through the tight I-70 corridor. And then you build a rail line that basically goes from Denver and then probably goes all the way up to Breckenridge. And I'd say Denver to Leadville. I'd say that because that benefits the Tennessee Pass. Because that means you could connect the Tennessee Pass that way, which would dramatically shorten the trip from Salida to Denver. If you just rode from Salida up to Leadville, and then probably you'd have to transfer trains, because even if it is a standard gauge railway, but it's a cog railway, you're gonna need to get on a different train, because standard gauge locomotives are not cog locomotives. You can build a standard gauge cog locomotive, but it wouldn't make sense to have standard gauge cog locomotives. I don't know, maybe you could have standard, the trains that operate on the Tennessee Pass with this new I-70 guideway project are able to operate on both, and they have cogs on them, so that way they can just get to Leadville and then go into Denver and just put the cog on, or drop the cog down, or engage the cog, which isn't that, it's more of a matter of cog locomotives tend to be a bit more rare and specialty and therefore more expensive. So if you have a cog locomotive, you want it working on a rack railway all the time. But who knows? Maybe a train in Salida has a cog on it, and just when it goes to Leadville, it makes a right turn into Denver and goes down through I-70, or drops down from Leadville down to I-70 in Breckenridge and engages its cog so it can climb through all that. But that would be a tremendous boon to the Tennessee Pass to have, basically Leadville would have two railroads then. It would have, actually it'd have three, because it'd have the Leadville Scenic Railroad. That one doesn't really count. But you'd have the traditional Tennessee Pass, and you'd have this cog railroad that descends from Leadville all the way down into Denver. And I just think a cog railroad would make more sense than a monorail. But if the monorail is cheaper to build and it'll have the same capacity and decent speed, build the monorail and send the monorail all the way up to Leadville, and then you can have a transfer station there. Of course, that would be really interesting to see what that looks like. I mean, there is a route that they could do if you follow the road that parallels the Tennessee Pass. There is a way you could take a monorail there where there isn't much development. You'd have to cross some private land, but it would be an elevated monorail, and hopefully the NIMBYs wouldn't fight it too much. They probably would fight tooth and nail, honestly. But if you could get down to kind of the plains, the flatlands between Leadville and Mount Massive, where the Tennessee Pass sits, there's plenty of space to build a transfer station there, where you could get off the monorail and onto the traditional train to go all the way into Salida. Which, if you built the I-70 monorail, that could easily shave 4 hours, 3 to 4 hours off of the trip from Salida to Denver, and make it probably pretty competitive with driving, honestly. And more comfortable and scenic, because it'd be really cool to go down I-70 on a monorail. If you're up in the air and you can see everything, that'd be cool. So, not really sure if that's ever going to happen, but it definitely makes a lot more sense than trying to widen a highway. And I think a few years ago, the cost to build the monorail on I-70 was actually projected to be less than it would be to add one more lane. And of course, as we've discussed, that additional lane probably wouldn't even solve I-70's traffic problems, which is, again, the lesson that we need to be learning. You can't just add one more lane and expect anything to get fixed. You need to provide an alternative mode. Whew. Morning. So that'd be interesting. I think it would make I-70 a lot safer. The Eisenhower Tunnel is an interesting problem to negotiate, though. Getting a monorail around that's probably you could probably build a monorail up to the tunnel and get it running, and then once it proves its popularity, then you could raise the funds to somehow figure out a way to add a monorail tunnel there. I'd say just take away one of the lanes of traffic, but you want to talk about starting a civil war. That's how you do that. So yeah, Amtrak and monorails. Colorado could have a rail-centric future ahead of it instead of a car-centric future. Especially in a state that's as environmentally conscientious as it claims to be. We'll see if the super crunchy granola Coloradan comes to their senses and realize train's good, Subaru's bad. That's actually a really good idea for a thumbnail. I'm probably gonna do that at some point. That'll get me some flack. I live in Colorado now. A Subaru and a Tacoma are part of my identity. That's funny. Well, you guys know where I am now, so I'm about to where I need to be. So, yeah. Start talking to people. Say, hey, Amtrak should do more in Colorado. Amtrak should run the Tennessee Pass. We need more ski trains. We need a train to Grand Junction. We need to build that Front Range corridor. We need to somehow link up with the rail runner. These are all great ideas, and I think we can do them. It's just a matter of time and money, and most importantly, political willpower. Well, see you guys later.